In the previous episode, The Causes of the American Revolution, we have discussed the circumstances of the discovery and the emergence of the New World. We also dealt with the War of Independence and the course in which it progressed. In this program, War of Independence, Various Interpretations, we propose to delve deeper into the character of this momentous revolution. Jameson, the prime proponent of the New Left school, has given a rather overblown interpretation of the revolution. He has argued that almost all sections of the people, the planter, the mechanic, the farmer, and the laborer, participated in this movement through the leadership of the bourgeoisie and the gentlemen farmers. However, the real picture of the revolution is not so egalitarian. Professor Chittobroto Palith has shown that mainly the upper classes of society and the poor whites also participated in the revolution. He also pointed out,
American Revolution was basically a bourgeois democratic revolution. Common people had no place in it. They were cannon fodders, all right, but they had no place in it. It was a revolution of the bourgeois, by the bourgeois, and for the bourgeois. That was the American Revolution.
We learnt that the people who were left out in this revolution were the blacks, the slaves who were brought from Africa, and also the Amerindians, the native people of America, the Hurons and Iroquois. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, of course said, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are unalienable natural rights of men." Unquote. The word pursuit of happiness used by Thomas Jefferson had more meaning to it than may be easily evident. The author Bernard Bailyn, in his famous book Ideological Origins of the American Revolution, gave us an alternative definition by explaining it to be basically a fight between liberty and authority. But Professor Palith has already questioned that proposition. He asked, whose liberty was it after all? It was liberty of the elite classes and not of all sections. Therefore, one cannot say it was a fight between liberty and authority.
When we further try to describe the revolutionary generation, we find that in the milieu, revolutionary milieu, we find that the people who were concerned with the revolution, they were mostly wanting to establish a kind of government which would be controlled by the elite section. They would be great democrats, no doubt, but they had only a theoretical identification with the common people. I would say that the revolution was actually fought on the economic grounds. There was a fundamental conflict between the rising American capitalism and the shackles of British mercantilism, which had become so unreal. The mother country couldn't control the colonies from 3,000 miles away. The Americans had men, money and material, educated leaders, the lawyers, the politicians of all kinds, and therefore such a country which had grown over the years through salutary neglect would naturally thrive in splendid isolation, and they would not accept the British authority anymore. And the revolution was inevitable. And therefore that revolution had come.
Lewis Hacker, in his famous work, The Triumph of American Capitalism, had underscored the same point. He also wanted to say that the fundamental conflict was economic rather than political.
So to summarize, let us say that it was neither a proletarian revolution, it was nor a revolution of all Americans. It was basically a white revolution which excluded the black people, the slaves on the one hand, and the red Indians, the original people of America. And it was a bourgeois democratic revolution mainly led by the merchant. The class bourgeoisie, they want that there should be freedom of different kinds. They want that there should be free capital, free labor, free thought, and they also want that there should be free property to enjoy. These are the essential features of any bourgeois democratic revolution, and we find that in this revolution too, these freedoms were asked for. But they are great heritage for mankind, no doubt, though coming from the elitist level, not actually ensuring natural rights to common people, but nevertheless they are also the priceless sense of liberty and privilege for the people who had been under colonial rule. And the American Revolution inspired many revolutions in the world.
Several speculations are encircling the great American event of 1776. One such is whether it's a revolution or simply a war of independence. Answering this, Professor Hari Vasudevan says,
the American Revolution has been accepted as a revolution. It was, like most revolutions though, an event which began from apparently very small beginnings. During the 1760s and early 1770s, despite great tensions that existed between the mother country and the 13 colonies, the resistance that was shown by the colonists to the government in London was by and large ignored by the authorities of George III. From 1774, however, following a dramatic occurrence that took place in December 1773, the entire tempo of what was taking place altered. In 1765, as we have already seen, the Stamp Acts were passed and were resisted in the colonies. Taxation was imposed on different goods. This was resisted. Committees were formed, mass agitations took place, disobedience on a large scale came to be established. Existing royal authorities were ignored. But still, London did not intervene actively in happenings in the 13 colonies. It was in 1773, in December, following the imposition of a monopoly of tea distribution in the 13 colonies by the East India Company, that the celebrated Boston Tea Party took place. Colonists broke into Boston Harbor, and under the leadership of Sam Adams, they threw large amounts of tea into the water. From this time onwards, we see a rapid development of confrontation between colonists and royal government. In 1774, in order to deal with so-called coercive measures that were taken against the colonists, the First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia. In 1775, a Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia in order to bring together and coordinate the activities of the colonists. And then finally, when it was decided by the royal government to take even more decisive measures in order to bring the colonists into tow, in July of 1776, as you know, the Declaration of Independence was promulgated.
But Professor Palith has argued
Revolution means that where you have a sea change of government, where table is turned, biter is bitten, and where common people, the proletariat, finds a release. It was not that kind of a revolution. It was not that. But in the French Revolution, it was a revolution. In the French Revolution, we really find that there was a crowd in the French Revolution, as Georges Roudet in his book has said. There was a crowd in the French Revolution. There are really have-nots who had participated in the revolution to equalize opportunities. French Revolution was really an epoch-making revolution. But American Revolution was not such an epoch-making revolution. American Revolution was actually fight between one group of bourgeoisie against the British bourgeoisie. Basically, it was a class conflict of a different kind. And common people did not so much have a role to play in the American War of Independence, American Revolution or War of Independence. More truly, War of Independence would be a better phrase than calling it a revolution. But since this was the first ever popular protest against British authority, it has been hailed as American Revolution. As I have already said, it is the precursor to the French Revolution. French Revolution took their cue or inspiration from the American Revolution.
Professor Hari Vasudevan characterizes revolution in a similar manner. He believes
revolutions are understood in two ways. One, there are certain theorists who take this position where you have one series of actors or people in control who disappear from a scenario and where another group actually come to take their place. The group that come to take their place are people who are challengers, who have not only a sense that they want to occupy the position of power, but that they wish to change the way in which power actually operates. That is the way in which you make a distinction between elite mobility, meaning the replacement of one elite by another, and a revolution. It is not simply a question of people removing groups in power, but where the entire rules of the game are changed. Now, in the case of the United States, there is clearly one group of people who are removed from authority and another group of people who assume authority. Thomas Hutchinson, governor of Massachusetts Bay, is a well-established figure of the middle of the 18th century, is a loyalist who takes the British side. He is part of the New England elite. He is removed. John Adams takes his place in the mid-1770s. This story we can see replicating itself in other American colonies as well. The British are the rulers of North America. They are removed from North America. The Americans who are local assume the reins of control. So once again, at another level, you have dispossession of one group by another group. In these senses, one can say, certainly the American Revolution is a revolution. It is a dispossession.
The American society maintained its status quo even after the revolution. The same elite classes retained their power, and the underdogs never came to the surface. It reminds us of the glorious revolution in England, which synchronized with the rise of the gentry there. The rise of the gentry means once again the merchants and the big farmers who combined to stage that revolution, as already shown by Louis B. Namier or Christopher Hill in their classic work. That was a bloodless revolution, whereas American Revolution was not a bloodless revolution. A lot of fight there. After all, glorious revolution was fought as a class war inside England, whereas in United States the fight was between an external power like England with the local power. So that difference is always there. But nevertheless, in class structure, in expressions of freedom, they were very much similar. The American Revolution has a big significance. The French Revolution naturally took its inspiration from the American Revolution, call it American War of Independence if you like. It took a lot of inspiration. But then in dimension, in magnitude, in every way, the French Revolution was something colossal. It, as I had already said, it really turned the world upside down. If I have to grade the three revolutions, I would say that the most momentous revolution was the French Revolution. The American Revolution comes next, and the British Glorious Revolution comes last.
The American Revolution was indeed a pioneering proposition that later motivated many nations to fulfill their rendezvous with destiny and redeem the true status of people. In the Declaration of Independence, the rights of man was truly expressed, that all men are created equal. Of course, one can question the exclusive language here, but that is another issue. The French Revolution and later several other independence movements staged all over the world drew their inspiration from the first fight, if only elusive, for the rights of the people. The French General Lafayette had actually fought in the American Revolution as well and helped the Americans in many ways.
The French supported this revolution and took their cue and inspiration from the American Revolution, which took the American Revolution took place in 1776, as you all know, but the French Revolution came in 1789. So there is that gap of more than 15 years, and therefore the one revolution snowballed into the other.
The stalwart intellectual Thomas Paine had written a pamphlet called Common Sense for the American revolutionaries. Later on, he wrote the famous book The Age of Reason for the French Revolution, and this book incidentally also traveled to Calcutta and inspired the Bengali youth, especially during the time India was struggling for its own independence. The Indian freedom fighters remembered the American Revolution, which was fought against the same enemies, the British. Therefore, we can certainly say that the American Revolution inspired not only the French Revolution, but also the Indian freedom movement.
When we discuss the consequence, the first thing that comes to my mind is that the revolution was not so much of conflict in America. The revolution came out of no major contradiction. It was on a note of minor contradiction between class and class. As Robert Brown, in interpreting the American Constitution, had pointed out that all the American people were more or less propertied. Some were more propertied, others were less propertied. There were no real have-nots in the American colonies at that time. Obviously, they only thought of the white population. They didn't think of the other population at all. But among the whites, there was therefore not much of a class conflict or class difference. All had some property or other, more or less propertied, as beautifully described by Robert Brown. And therefore, as a consequence, we would say that this class, the privileged classes, who were property classes, they wanted to enshrine their privilege in the new government that they would soon form, and they would also pass a constitution at the Philadelphia Convention in America in 1787. And the revolutionary people of America, who were no other than the bourgeois people, merchants, and the planters, and the gentlemen farmers, and business tycoons, barristers, people like them, they wanted to enshrine their right in the Constitution. They were fighting for life, liberty and pursuit of happiness. And therefore, this was something which was new altogether in 1776. And therefore, this has a special kind of significance. In the Philadelphia Convention of 1787, they had that day. So, if there were any protests from any have-not at all, or if there was any protest from slaves or the Red Indians, that was brushed aside. So, it was a bourgeois victory. It was a bourgeois-led, bourgeois-sponsored revolution. But even then, even at that level where the revolution had taken place, it was significant because after all, the main thing was to throw off the colonial yoke. That itself was qualitatively a revolution. But if we talk about an inner revolution, it is not so much of an inner revolution in America, as there was a status quo in society, as there were the marginalization of the black people and the Red Indians. They also fought for their ideology of freedom, no doubt. At whatever levels, they fought for ideology of freedom. So they were complementary. These two were complementary, and both were expressed equally vigorously. Economic conflict was expressed vigorously. The ideological conflict was also expressed vigorously. And as to the outer revolution, it really acquires a great significance. It is truly a revolution. Revolution means that the world is turned upside down. From that point of view, if it was aimed at colonial rule, it was a revolution. If it was aimed at inner classes, then it was not that kind of revolutionary. It was, as one historian has said, it was more an evolution than revolution. Truly speaking, it was more an evolution than a revolution, and that should be the correct analysis of the character of the American Revolution and its consequences. There are various labels attached to the American Revolution. Some call it an all-American revolution, some call it a bourgeois democratic revolution, some call it a white revolution, some call it a proletarian revolution. And it's very difficult for an impartial historian to fix one label to the American Revolution. But I have some kind of a subconscious identity with the labeling of the American Revolution as a white revolution. So that fit. It is not strictly a proletarian revolution. It is not, strictly speaking, an all-American revolution. So it was a white revolution would be a better characteristic. Bourgeois democratic revolution is okay. Next point that we raised was the comparison between among the three revolutions, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Glorious Revolution in England. We had tried to grade them, and we find that French Revolution is far more epoch-making, far more momentous than the other two revolutions. And because the French Revolution was universal, it really turned the world upside down. Have-nots came to the surface. The crowd was in action, as Rude said, in the French Revolution. In America, the bourgeois classes were in action, not so much the crowd. The Glorious Revolution, which was mainly the work of the gentry, they wanted their privileges, therefore a revolution came at that time. It became something like a fight between prerogative versus privilege. So the rising gentry, merchant classes, and the gentlemen farmers, businessmen, they wanted to grab power, monopolize parliament. Therefore they had to reduce the authority of the prerogative, that is Rex versus Lex, and it led to a regicide. Charles I was executed in the Glorious Revolution. And America also, it was same thing, privilege versus prerogative, but its revolutionary character comes from the point of view that they were overthrowing a foreign rule, a colonial rule. That is its additional factor, for which, if I have to grade the three revolutions, French Revolution comes first, American Revolution from its the outer revolution point of view to the second, and the British Glorious Revolution comes to the third. Then I had discussed about the consequences, and in course of that we had once again found that in American Revolution there was no major contradiction. It was a story of minor contradiction between the mother country and the colony. Both were bourgeoisie. The American merchants were another kind of rising bourgeoisie fighting against the entrenched bourgeoisie of England. So both were bourgeoisie from that point of view. It was a minor contradiction that I had tried to show, and I had also brought in a debate which we discuss next time in connection with the making of the Constitution. And here I would like to conclude this lecture. Thank you.